friends, my name is Jasmine and I'm an illustrator. If this is not your first video from my channel, you're probably aware that I have a sci-fi webcomic called Space Warriors on Instagram and on Webtoons. I just launched it at the beginning of June 2020, and can you believe that I don't know how long it's supposed to run for? Not because the information isn't out there, it's mostly because I haven't dedicated the time to figure that out. So let's do that. Let's run all the numbers, figure out how many pages we're talking about here that have already been made, that are going to be made, and truly get a set date of how long this story is gonna go for, because that's important. I am a fan of Excel sheets, but I would rather, for this kind of investigation, I would rather do it by hand. By hand. Why do we want to know how long this comic is gonna go? Because I have certain long-term goals that require for the story to end eventually, like a Kickstarter to have a printed version of this comic. Now, if I don't know when this webcomic is going to finish, I can't anticipate making a Kickstarter for it, and if people ask me when is this comic gonna be done and I don't know the answer, it's not a good look. Basically, what we're gonna do today is add up all of the page numbers that I know exist, and then add potential page numbers for the portion of the story that I haven't yet thumbnailed, just to see ballpark when the story is technically supposed to end, now that I am actually posting comic pages online on a very consistent schedule. So why don't we start? I've got my handy dandy notebook, and we're gonna open up to a new section. What we want to do is, using this stamp, each row is going to be 1 week of publishing, and each square is going to be a day. So technically, we have 7 weeks in this block. So 7 weeks times 7 days, that equals 49 pages. To explain a little bit about this weird chart, every day I'm posting 1 page. That means for the first week, the first 7 pages of the story are going to be published. On week 2, pages 8 to 10.5 are going to be published. This is all for part 2. This is my way of figuring out just how far along we're going. To explain a little bit about the composition of this comic, the story is divided into 3 parts, like 3 acts. The first act, part 1, has already been done. It's been drawn, colored, it is ready to go, and in fact it's already started to be published. I don't have to worry about it, but I don't know when that last page of part 1 will be published. I recently finished editing all of part 1, so I wasn't sure if I was going to remove or add any extra pages. Now that I finished editing it, I can finally sit down and truly be able to answer the question, what is the exact day that the last page of part 1 will be published? Now, where are we on part 2? Part 2 has already been written and thumbnailed, and I'm about to start drawing it. So that is actually still very useful information, because now that it's been thumbnailed, I know how many pages there are. So if I don't add or remove any pages while I'm drawing, theoretically, but let's be real, it's probably gonna happen, I can also give a date of what day the last page of part 2 will be published. As far as part 3 goes, I haven't even written it, so I don't know how many pages it's going to be. But I'm going to assume that now that I already have 2 parts, I can average them out and give a ballpark estimation of part 3's number of pages. So I don't think that should be that much of a problem. All we want is just a general idea of what the end date of this story is going to be. Using this stamp, I'm going to make a calendar to plan out what exact pages are going to be published every week until the very last page of each part. So I'm going to draw a whole calendar and jot down every week's pages that will be published if I were to post once a day. And here we are with 2 pages full of calendar stuff. As you can see, in pink is part 1, And the last day that part 1 will be published is January 18, 2021. Since all I could fit was May, the last page of May will be page 103, which still leaves a whole 2/3 left of part 2. Part 2 actually has 384 pages, so we are nowhere near finishing part 2 by May, unfortunately. So when would the actual date for part 2 is? Well, I made this little chart of, hypothetically, if we do 1 post a day, when would each part start and end? So part 1 would start, obviously, June 2020, and it would end in January 2021. As of part 2, though, I put it into a Google Calendar calculation thing, and it says January 2022. That is a long time from now. Now, hypothetically speaking, since we don't know how many pages part 3 has, let's just assume it has 300, which is somewhere in between these two parts. If it's 300 pages, it's gonna go until November 2022. That's more than 2 years. Is it just me, or is that an awful long time? That's a long time. I don't know. Maybe it isn't. Let me know in the comments. Is that a long time to wait for a story to conclude? 2 years with daily comic pages posted? You know why I say that? Because I remember back in middle school dying to read Cardcaptors, the manga, at the bookstore. We'd have to wait months and months to see a new book come into the bookstore, and it sucked having to wait that long for a story that you like. I'm gonna assume that there's other people that don't like that either, so I think 2 years is too long, you guys. So how can we change that? How can we make it not 2 years? Because that would be great. Honestly, the other option would be to, instead of posting 1 page, I post 2 pages a day. What that would do was cut this timeline in half, obviously, because it'd be double posting. So what would that look like? I made a chart. On the other side of this chart, we have the dates of what would occur if we were to post 2 pages a day. Part 1 would end of this year, September 25, and part 2 would end April of next year. Now part 3, again, if we assume it's 300 pages, would end September 2021. That means this story would conclude next year. Is that a much more reasonable timeline? Yes, it is a much more reasonable timeline as a reader. Now, as an artist, I don't know about that, because that means I have to be posting 2 pages a day. If there is a chance that I fall behind on this schedule, worst case scenario, I am drawing and coloring the page that is due that day. That means I have to do 2 of those pages a day, that day, or the next day, whatever. Double posting means double the load, basically. What would it look like if we added another spread of calendars and see what that schedule would look like? Here is the schedule if we were to post 2 times a day. Guys, did you think I was a sane person? Absolutely not, you're wrong. Part 1 would end October-ish, and part 2 would end in June. Every time I finish a part, I think I'm gonna give myself a couple of weeks of a break to start the new part. This looks like a much more reasonable timeline. I can't really complain about this, other than I am absolutely terrified at the prospect of ever falling behind and dealing with this kind of responsibility. Pretty much every webcomic's nightmare. What does any of this mean to me right now? What? Well, it certainly means that my story is moving way too slow at the moment, and I should probably be posting twice a day. That means for the Webtoons weekly publishing, the chapters will be 14 pages long instead of 7. So honestly, this is great news for you, not so great for me. This is what's gonna happen. I don't want to be working on this project for 2.5 years. I really don't. So there you go. I guess I'm announcing that Space Warriors will be doing double daily posts. And that is why it's really important that once you decide on a posting schedule for your comic, you really should try to forecast what that calendar is going to look like down the line, because you'll be able to figure out just how often you should be posting or not. Now, did I see this coming? Yes, because I never got to sit down and do this. So I knew that perhaps there was a chance that I was going to change my posting schedule. I just didn't foresee that it would be a double the amount of work that I will now have to accept. And that's okay. Your gal loves a good challenge, right? So now you can see how complicated things can get when you're dealing with a comic that has a lot of pages. If you're still in the planning phase for your comic, these are things that you should definitely consider. Anyways, now that I know that part 1 is going to end by October, that does mean that I have until October to get my shit together with part 2. All of these squares need to be filled in with color, and that's how I'm going to know that I'm on the right track. Do I feel good? Yes, because I don't have this nebulous idea of the timeline of this comic. What I am a little bit worried about is being able to keep up with the workload and meeting that October deadline. So the lesson for today's video is stay organized, however ways that you do it. You can use Excel, or you can use these really adorable stamps. Very important, professional, serious things here. If you have any questions about the method of how I even figured this out, I hope I even made sense, because I feel like I probably didn't. But if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! If there is a chance that I fall behind on this schedule